were too many people on the bosom of Mother Earth couldn't handle it.
Now, technically, we supposedly can still have more of an increase in population. And one of the interesting things is, of course, you have the graying of Europe, which you're talking about Europe. Right now, you have insufficient people being born in most of Europe, and it's really corrupting the entire system because they have what's called a social welfare state. And right now you have 4 or 5 people paying for one person who is retired. And if there isn't a mass immigration into Europe, you're only going to have 2 people paying for one person who's retired, and that doesn't work because they get a lot more in Social Security benefits than we ever do. So that's a real serious situation.
Well, I'm glad you brought the mass. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because that's the situation we're facing a few years down the road. And if you look over in Europe, you see riots already starting. Just recently, when they tried to extend the work weekend.
Yeah, exactly. In France, yes.
Societies collapse under situations like that. Now that is almost a certainty, and you can see it developing right now. My argument about this global warming is if you're misdirecting your efforts, you could use that money better elsewhere, and right there would be a great solution because you're almost facing a certainty with that situation here in the U.S. Global warming is highly speculative. Do you spend your money on a speculative issue or a certainty?
Well, of course, in the U.S. per se, we are populating at 2.1% right now, which isn't bad. And with immigration coming in, we don't see a major problem that Europe is facing that quickly. Europe is definitely facing something between now and 2050. They're already increasing their retirement ages because they had very low ages for women and also for men. And so anyway, this is a different story.
What you're bringing up, JJ, what you're saying about the resources, not to be, foolish with resources. I think what the problem is to not create this feeling of there's not enough, and then people want to protect their own, and there's not enough for the other, instead of seeing that the other is exactly who we need to embrace in order to achieve our full potential, to where the 0 point energy, we will be worthy, we will be ready, it will come forth, the cold fusion or the different theories that many people feel have been squelched in the same way that science is.
Well, I've talked to Hal Puthoff in his Advanced Physics Institute in Austin, and he would agree that 0 point energy, as is currently understood by physicists, is something on the order of 20 to 30 years in the future. We're looking at hands-on realities now where we can, again, I accept your argument, change our attitudes and approach.
Well, so that we won't use it for weapons.
Approach this by looking at abundance of the human mind, the human intellect, the human heartbeat, as opposed to purely products, gross national products, et cetera, et cetera. We need to look at the inner resources that are on the table that we effectively represent here at this table discussion.
I mean, he was skeptical about 0 point energy.
Well, Paul, I think you made some points that I thought are very, very important. The first of all is you're outlining about what we've put our efforts towards versus what we haven't.
Right.
We've directed almost all of our efforts towards proving CO2 causes it. That means we're not studying other things that could be the real cause. It's like trying to treat a patient and you're looking at their foot instead of their head, where the problem's in the head.
Yeah, the patient's going to suffer.
Sure, if you don't diagnose the problem, you can never cure the problem. More importantly, what you're pointing also is that if you create an environment where there's a scarcity or you're blaming man, like we covered last night, you start to point the finger at man and you start to come up with some serious solutions for it. And as we demonstrated last night in the presentation, China is already justifying their infanticide, their one-child policy on global warming. And we went through a couple other situations. So you can see that even if we're very benevolent and we have the best of intentions, you can imagine what a totalitarian state can do when they now have a justification that's saying man causes global warming and we don't leak certain things that certain people
Although
are saying.
That would be very unusual because the fact is they've had this infanticide program for at least 20 years before global warming was even an issue.
Well, I know.
So that is something.
But they're now justifying it with it. And you can see where it leads.
I don't know if global warming is an issue. That's what I'm saying. I want to know. There's a lot of things I want to know. I'm in the 9/11 truth movement. I still cannot tell you how those towers came down. I don't know, but I want to know. And I feel that knowledge is a good thing. Knowledge is not a bad thing. Knowledge should not be a divisive thing. And if we can open our hearts or trust each other, then we can bring together our best. We can put the best that we have on the table. whether we have degrees or whether we don't have degrees.
No.
Each person's experience will be honored as an important fabric in the society.
You asked before, Paula, about whether the Earth can sustain a greater population, whether there's overpopulation. I think there's an overpopulation of ignorance. And that's the
Excellent,
problem.
excellent.
And I don't think that there's any more room for it. And before, as I said on Joe's show, there isn't any more room for the overpopulation of greed. You see, these two factors, and these are psychological in nature, have everything to do with the issues obscuring science and keeping us from getting the proper diagnosis of whatever the issue. I want to add something else as someone with background in Chinese medicine that understands everything is an energy system. So even if you're looking, Robert, at the foot and you think down the road that the problem is really in the head, the foot actually systemically reaches the head. And so even if you're just focusing on the foot, you're going to get a result in the head. Okay. And it's part of the fractal relationship of all things in this universe.
But just a second, what about...
Not to say, don't look for the truest and quickest diagnostics.
So wouldn't you agree that we should be looking at all things and not basically funding research on carbon?
If I can add to that,
I do, yeah.
We do work a little bit in and out of some of the work of NASA. And NASA has spent tremendous amounts of money analyzing what's going on with the sun. We have SOHO up there. We have new programs going up there. As we mentioned, we have GRACE going just to measure certain things in terms of water and the entire gravity. So I would say that if NASA is really not, in a certain sense, looking at the carbon, NASA is spending its money in looking at the entire planet and the sun and the stars.
What about NASA?
So
I'm so glad you brought that up.
So I would say that funding has come out of, we'll say, U.S. government
And
sources.
what has NASA been finding? They have found out that not only are our polar caps melting, but so is our Mars.
Exactly.
And polar. So what you're finding is that what we're experiencing isn't a global warming phenomenon, it's a solar system warming phenomenon.
Systemic.
It's very,
Exactly.
it's very, very hard to make the argument that CO2 is causing global warming when we don't drive SUVs up on Mars and there's not an increase in CO2.
As you know, our feeling,
they may be.
and I can speak,
I'd like to be the first to get up there to drive around.
As we can say also, I think I can speak for Mitch, and I know I can speak for my husband, that humanity is only the kind of end of the iceberg for the CO2 problem. There is definitely, and so I just want to emphasize that there is tremendous amount of money going on in universities, at NASA, and universities worldwide towards just looking at the global situation and the solar situation and even the universe.
But if you saw his presentation, carbon is clearly not the problem. It couldn't be the problem.
We're not arguing, carbon is the problem. We are looking at many factors. We refuse to be put in a dualistic model that it has to be carbon or non-carbon.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem.
And that's the biggest problem.
I had the opportunity to work.
But the dualistic model is what funds people.
Exactly.
No, but it's not.
It's not even dual.
Well, the majority of university professors, if you talk to them, they'll let you know. If you in the Great Global Warming Swindle points that out. That's where the funding comes from. If you're going to do a study, you say you're going to tie into global warming. But let's get back to NASA. NASA has done a lot of different studies as far as, like I just pointed out there. The other thing with NASA is if you look at their temperature measurements, they have quotes showing that according to their satellites and balloon, there's no discernible warming trend in the lower atmosphere in the last 18 plus years. Okay, so they do a lot of good research, and what they're pointing out goes against many of the arguments that you're hearing.
But they're different departments. See, that's why I'm saying it is dualistic. We are living in a dualistic society, and scientists are quaking in their boots. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their tenure. They want to get the jobs, get the tenure. That's my concern.
I'm hearing what Robert is saying, and I go along with Robert's keen way of model building. And I wanted just to say, for the fact of the Mars situation, I happen to be one of the few that analyzed the first Mariner B9 frames coming back in 1972-73 from the Martian surface. I have an actual historic document with me of the actual pictures sent back from the Elysian Quad Triangle, where Jet Propulsion Lab scientists were amazed that Mars really didn't have any water resources. At that time, there was no such thing as a really proto-ocean on Mars or large lakes, or there was no understanding of how Mars lost its atmosphere. And so we can have, as it were, the best scientific tools to look down to the micron level, but if we do not see the big picture, then we're obviously missing the whole situation of looking at a universal paradigm. And I think this is where our work complements one another, because my wife and I in planetary science are looking at the sun, looking at solar flares, looking at other situations of cosmic oscillations.
Also, magnetic field changes that are taking place is a major thing. And there's tons of funding going on into these areas. So I don't want to say...
Do you mean as it affects the human heart, for example? Planetary changes?
Just in terms of measuring the
what does planetary
magnetic
science
field.
mean? Magnetic fields?
Well, planetary science, of course, is a massive amount of work having to do with everything from...
Centered on the basic planets of our solar system as we define them, and the relationship of their effect on all life as it is defined, especially human evolution.
And of course, funding is always very, very critical. And I think also, I know one of the things I agree with Bob is that companies need to develop a little bit more too. And you know, there's no reason that we're driving cars even that have had the same gas mileage for the last 30 years. Where is the funding to help push that?
But you see, this was the thing when you had me listen to Amy Goodman's thing at WBAI. I want to listen because I wasn't that interested in global warming. I just wanted to know, is it warming or not? I just want to know, simple to strike a course. And they had a guest on that had a book that minutely went into detail on all the reasons that it's warming, and they didn't say anything on the show. And by the end, when you try to call in, it's just donate, donate, donate. And it was this kind of evangelistic type of vibe, which I citing to you because, like a Chinese doctor looking at all of the symptoms, are these good symptoms where you're not having the allowance? So I understand we have no more time allowed here. This is Paula Gloria, and this has been Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. I hope we have a chance in the future to go farther. Thank you. Thank you all of us for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
The one thing I didn't get to say when you're talking about NASA was that if you've seen the episode Global Dimming, pollution actually can argue that it cools the Earth. It doesn't warm. And I wish we would have brought that point up because I don't think most people understand that.
Also, the fact
Can Mitchell just answer?
Or not?
Can you just keep the tape rolling so Mitchell keep the tape rolling so Mitchell can answer? So Mitchell, what do you think as a symptom?
Can you just post the question again? So
what I wanted to say was, when you have an institution that's trusted to be one that's alternative, and you feel you can't get your viewpoint through, they're not answering. All they want is money. You feel you're right back to the same place. That your query, your questioning, your wondering is not appreciated, and you're not doing it to hurt or to harm. You just want to know.
You're bringing up a very important point, Paula, which
That's
is
a symptom to me.
the selling of the news media as a profit source. And so,
like global warming, people will get hysterical. We're going to make a lot of money. We'll sell books.
Exactly.
Bring on the guest that's going to jack up everybody's
PowerPoint presentations. Who knows what? Subscriptions to an internet service.
But then it leads to thinking there's too many people, and let's get who really cares about the Chinese? Some don't care. They think there are too many of them. Underneath, that's what they're thinking.
Well, that's
what you end up
But here you
seeing
studied the medicine, so you respect the culture.
Oh, yes.
And when I was in Israel, I met tons of people who knew Chinese medicine and acupuncture.
Sure.
But how do you get that enlightenment to the masses?
Again, I have to come back to the idea. I mean, one of the fundamental principles of Chinese medicine and Chinese philosophy is this idea of dealing with excess and deficiency. And before I said that we have an excess of ignorance.
Right.
And we have a deficiency of intelligence.
Yes, that's a good point, isn't it, Bob? If you had ignorant people, you wouldn't want to get rid of the people. You'd want to enlighten them.
Exactly.
Educate.
So the people
it's not
stay
a
in the
population.
system.
It's not a human population issue.
Right.
It's an ignorance issue. And I also brought up excess greed. You see, if
But that's
people
insecurity,
believe,
and people are
exactly,
insecure when they think,
exactly.
oh, we're running out in the globe, the plants,
That's
get insecure.
right. It's a poverty mentality, as Dr. Hertog was saying earlier, basically implying.
Yeah.
And what Bob and I think all of us agree so heartily is that let scientists be scientists. Give them the money to do their impartial, objective work without having an alliance to a given business outcome.
Sure.
This is what we need.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, if you look at Louis Pasteur, and they put an institute in his name.
After.
But that was after he actually rescinded his perspective on the importance of pasteurization. Right. He rescinded it all, but he was very wealthy as an MD. But this is the
Do you know the Louis
confusion.
Pasteur story?
No,
This is the
big Atlantis,
confusion.
though. I'll look
I
it
know.
up.
Look it up. Anything
Sure.
he's on.
It's the confusion of science and business.
Yeah.
And I love science and I love business, and there's a proper place for both.
Right.
It's just when one
Right.
co-opts the other, we have hell to
Right.
pay.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I
that's
think-
what's going on in the global warming situation.
I think we all can agree we need open minds to look at this because we all want the truth. We don't want to be misled. So I think that's the most important thing.
Exactly.
Thank you. I'm honored to have all of you.
It's been a real honor to be here. Real pleasure.
Wonderful.
What a fun.
Thank you, Paula.
Okay, thanks. So now, I guess, Alan, you're on. Yes, thank you, thank you.
So much fun.
Real ple-
Anyway, I was going to say, one of CO2, we need a new energy source regardless.
I
We're
totally
running
agree.
out of.
And I think part of the problem is that people are confusing the issues.
Yeah,
They're using
I wanted
this
to
to
get
push
into that a
back.
little bit, yeah.
That'll be the next episode.
Yeah, okay.
Good, right?
So it's just like, yeah, it's just
No, because
there are
actually,
very